we are a 53% renter city. And the renters in our city are, in high percentages, people of color, cost burdened, people most impacted by housing disparities and poverty generally. And, you know, it's important to have a program like this that works for people.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
Jimmy, where in Minneapolis do you live?
I stay over north.
Okay. Which ward? Who's your council member?
Latricia Vito.
Okay. Well, we're going to have an uphill battle with Latricia, I think, on this one. Possibly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm already knowing.
Okay. I'm going to introduce the show. This is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards, and today's episode is all about rent control, and it's a big topic in the city. It's going to be a big topic next year. The city's rent stabilization work group just wrapped up their work, and they have a majority. I'm not going to get into that. There's some policy recommendations, and my guests today are Jennifer Arnold with Inquilinxs Unidxs, right? How's my Spanish?
Bad.
Really? How would you
not that
say
bad.
it? How would you say it?
I would say Inquilinxs Unidxs.
Okay. It was too hard on the Q.
Yeah, exactly. Go to K instead of Q.
And Jimmy
I struggle
Harris.
with it too.
Thank you, Jimmy. Jimmy Harris is here too. Who are you involved with? Inquilinxs Unidxs?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Okay. What is your role, Jimmy?
I'm an organizer on the north side of Minneapolis. I'm really just an organizer with the organization, really.
Let's talk about why this policy is so necessary in Minneapolis, a city where I think it's like 51 or more % of people in Minneapolis are renters. Just a big picture, why is this so necessary?
To me, I feel like a lot of people do rent. And with that being said, like corporate landlords buy homes. They majority of them are homeowners. So like with that, it's very important if we in a city where we got majority of renters than homeowners, that's a problem. You know, we should have something where it's stability and stuff like that. So I feel like it's very important because I feel like in the future we can have more homeowners instead of just corporate landlords, you know.
Have you had any particularly bad experiences as a renter? Like, is this personal for you? Like, have you had your rent raised to an extreme degree and been forced to seek new housing as a result?
Before, I'd say my first bad experience was actually in North Minneapolis. When I stayed in Shakopee, it wasn't that bad. In North Minneapolis, it was bad. My rent got increased. I can't even name the percentage off back, but it got increased. Like I was paying like 12 something, and I was gonna do month to month because of repairs was being delayed. I was dealing with rodent problems, so I was gonna do month to month and find a new place. In that process, when they sent me my lease, like if you want to renew your lease or you want to do month to month, I already had the plan to do month to month, find a new place. The month to month during COVID was like $1,400. I was paying at least $1,235 a month, and I was like, whoa, I can't afford this. But out of that or $1,320, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna sign another year and pay the $1,320 because I'm in a situation where I don't got no option when I got kids, you know.
Right. You basically have to you have to eat it because the alternatives just aren't there.
Yeah.
So talk about some of your advocacy. Like, you've got your personal experiences. How long have you been working as an organizer on this issue?
I want to say a year, probably a little bit more than a year. because I was really volunteering with the issue. When I found out the issue actually existed and you could do something about it, I got the volunteering really hard. You know,
How did you find out that you could do something about it?
I met Angela, and Angela introduced me to like Angela and Chloe. They introduced me to like the IX organization, and then Jennifer, she told me about it. It was like, hey, this might be good for you. So I ended up joining like this membership group called Seeds of Hope, and they was really all about the policy. And I liked it that because it really benefited me and my family because I've been through the same thing everybody else been through at the Seed of Hope group. So that's how I found out and got like the information to learn about it. You know, I had a lot of questions at first, I did. But when I learned how beneficial it was going to be for like my family, my kids' future, and other kids and other family, I was like, this is important. We got to step on this. We got to do this.
When your rent went up, are you still in the same housing as when your rent went up, or did you find a new place?
I'm still with the same housing. They actually did some improvement, you know,
Okay.
do the IX, do the IX. They really did some improvement.
John, IX is a word for Inquilinxs Unidxs, just a shortened version of our organization.
That's good for listeners because I definitely knew that already. I promise.
No, I can't say the name correctly, so it's like, yeah, I say IX for sure.
Why is it not IU? This is kind of not important, but why is it not IU? Why is it IX?
I thought because it was in Spanish, you know, it made sense to me.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't really know.
Okay.
I think probably it was like way back when. So 7 years or so ago, I think probably my co-director Roberto started calling it that when we started talking about it in English, and it stuck. Okay. He yeah.
Jimmy, what kind of landlord do you have? Is it a small like individual, or is it a landlord that owns like a bunch of different houses?
Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we got like the number one most corporate landlord for single family homes in America. It used to be number 2, but I believe that it went up to number 1.
Yeah, it is the largest single family homeowner in the country. A private equity company called Pretium Partners.
Okay.
But locally known, you can talk about that, Jimmy.
Progress Residential or Havenbrook. They can go by many names. They got money like that, you know. Yeah,
so it's not a person that you're dealing with, really. It's you get things in the mail, and this is how it is. Like how do you deal with your land? I guess there's a property manager.
Yeah, I don't really deal with the landlord. I never really met the landlord. I met like in a way they entities like property managers. Because I'll usually just, when it comes to my rent, I'll usually just drop it off. That's the cheapest thing to do, just drop it off instead of paying through the portal. They charge too much for that. So
working as an organizer, are you seeking out like other renters to organize them? What are you doing? And then what is your pitch?
Most definitely. I'm seeking out other renters that's going through the same thing I went through. I won't even say the same exact thing I went through, but dealing with like the same exact like title. So for like repair issues, communication issues, and we trying to come up with a solution together because we all going through the same thing. We just want improvement. We don't got no problem staying where we stand, mainly, you know. And my main pitch to them is just telling them my story of what I've been through, staying through the same landlord they stand with.
Do you notice any themes when you talk to people? Like maybe things that haven't occurred to you, or maybe that have. Like, what are the big themes that you hear that somebody who doesn't do the work you do organizing people might not be aware of?
They usually don't want to talk. They think that I work for like the company. Till I tell my story, and then I guess my story relates like so much to what they going through or similar to what they dealing with, rather it's communication issues or repair issues. They open up and then they just get to telling me their story. Now we could resonate with each other from that. So it's more like, that's like the biggest thing like with that one.
So people are a little like hesitant, maybe a little fearful that you're not friendly to their interests.
Yeah, I won't say like friendly because I'll come in friendly, but I think like they worry about retaliation. I'll be like, hey, how you doing? My name is Jimmy, I'm with IX, etc. But the whole time they like, what? And then I tell them, I know about like your landlord, Havenbrook. And then they be like, oh, snap. So you work for Havenbrook? No. Hold on. Let me finish saying what I'm saying. So it'd be like a protection thing. They be nervous. Like with Havenbrook, they don't have like no shirts to show you like, hey, I'm a maintenance man or none of that. They don't got nothing to represent themselves when they come to your door to repair. So it's like they're not sure. They could be behind on rent or they could be dealing with whatever they dealing with, and scared to have Havenbrook knock on their door. That's how I feel. I feel like a lot of them scared for Havenbrook to knock on their door at that point. That's what I took in.
Do you have a message for the people of Minneapolis, the leadership of Minneapolis, now that we have these recommendations, which we are about to talk about and what they are? What is your message to the political leadership in Minneapolis?
For the political leadership, I'll tell them to be fair. We did the work group. We basically did the advisory job. We built the framework. We did what y'all asked for. I feel like I'm just waiting to see the language to be put out for everything that we did. You got the research behind that, and majority of the research was supported based off the votes. I don't want to see like everything that we voted for on Frame 5 that was very successful, that was supposed to be recommended, but we see some of Framework 7 on there. That will make me feel highly uncomfortable, and I feel like it's very unfair. Like we didn't have like a fair case. What was the whole point of doing a work group when we already got people that got accepted to the work group that didn't want to make a policy?
Yeah. Well, Jimmy, thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it.
Where do I start? Jennifer, I've done so much studying. I have so many numbers in my head. And I was wondering if you could help me be composed and describe what has happened with this rent stabilization work group. We've got a majority of the 25, 14 of them said, we want what they're calling Framework 5. Tell me what is in what the majority of this work group, which are regular citizens, not elected officials, they're unpaid, various interested parties, renters, landlords, developers, housing advocates. What did they say they wanted?
Can I just step us back one step before I do that?
I did a whole long question, and now we're stepping back. What are we stepping back to?
We're not going to go far. Don't
Okay.
worry, John. Basically, last year the city of Minneapolis voted to move forward on rent stabilization. And at the beginning of this year, the city of Minneapolis appointed a work group of 25 members, like you said, to develop a framework, to develop a proposal policy that the council could then use to move forward with. And that group met from September until yesterday, so 10 times. And we were tasked with coming to consensus. So 14 of the 25 people supported a policy yesterday that is a 3% cap on rents. That means rents can raise up to 3% every year. With no CPI, no vacancy decontrol. That means if a renter moves out, the landlord cannot raise the rents more than 3%. The 3% stays in all the time. And no exemptions. That means that new construction is included, single-family homes are included, all kinds of housing are included in this recommendation. And so, this is the policy that got consensus, the majority consensus from the group, that will then go back to city council, and council, supposedly will put it on the ballot in second quarter of next year.
But they will amend it, right? They're going to do their own thing. What the work group did is not binding.
Correct. Yeah, it is not binding.
Who are the people in the minority opinion? Like, is these the developers and the landlords?
Yeah,
who are involved?
What a great question. I want to actually say who was in both groups.
Okay.
So in the 14 majority opinion included an affordable housing developer, a small landlord, a realtor, renters, and renter advocates. And the 11, the minority opinion, which I don't remember all the details of, but can tell you some of them. You maybe have them in front of you. Included was entirely landlord, developer, and renter interests. Sorry, not renter, landlord interests. There was one renter on that group, but he works for Hornig. So,
did he get a renter spot on the?
He got a renter spot on the committee. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Curious. Yes. My experience was that he represented his work, really in that space more than anything else. And that kind of makes sense.
So I'm looking at the sheet here. As I said, I feel like I did so much studying for this, and there's so many. It's so complicated.
There's so many details to this. Yeah.
Good luck to the city council in enacting a policy here. So fixed rent increases at 3%. That was the majority recommendation. No. Yeah. So let's talk about this one. Why no inflation adjustment allowed? Why just the 3% and nothing more?
Yeah, I mean, the process was interesting in that we discussed every component of the policy sort of at length. We talked about the percentage with the, vacancy control or decontrol. That was considered core policy. And then we talked about exemptions as one area and exceptions. And when we talked about core policy, there wasn't consensus about inflation or not. What we heard from landlords and developers was that inflation isn't necessarily a good calculation of their increases year over year, but there was no consensus from the landlords about what would be better.
So is housing inflation more extreme than regular like consumer price index stuff? I didn't understand the distinction there. What is housing inflation?
Right. Well, housing costs go up for landlords for different reasons or in different ways than for other things. So what I heard from people in the industry was housing costs go up because of rising insurance costs, rising costs of labor, and rising costs of property taxes. And so those, can track to inflation, but won't necessarily. And, I would say on the other side, there was the consideration that any variable policy would have to be widely publicized every year, right? It would change every year and you'd have to do a lot of work to educate the renter population. Our job as a work group was to make a policy that could best support people who are most cost burdened, most impacted by housing disparities in the city. And from our work in that population, like you heard from Jimmy, it felt really important to have a policy that was very straightforward. And I think, St. Paul has also, they passed and now have reaffirmed a 3% cap on rents. And so that felt like an important marker for folks in our group, which is, I would say those two reasons are why we landed on 3%. Additionally, Cura did this research for the city of Minneapolis that we looked at as part of our process. And in the research, they found that in the last 20 years, the rents on average have not risen above 3%. And so, sometimes it's a lot less and sometimes it's and so we felt like even if it's a year of high inflation, that may be a hard moment for a landlord and it will balance out over time because normally that's not how things are.
Yeah, I was going through because that presentation is it years old at this point, the Cura presentation?
It may be a year or two. It may be 2 years old.
Because I remember seeing it at the city council,
yeah,
what feels like a very long time ago. And I looked at it again. It's kind of remarkable how most of the time, and this cuts both ways, because the landlords will be like, well, I don't even raise my rents by this amount anyway, so why are you regulating me? And then you think, well, if that's the case, then
it won't impact you.
No harm to you. It's very, very few cases where this will apply, ideally. I'm sure there... Yeah, go ahead.
I agree, and I've heard from council members and other people, like, we need a really targeted policy to only the bad landlords. And my answer to that is, we should have a universal policy, and it will only impact the bad landlords. Because supposedly all the other landlords are not raising their rents at these, exorbitant amounts.
Let's talk about vacancy control and also explain what that means. Again, I know you did it earlier, but it's basically that while the unit is occupied by a tenant, rents are controlled.
Yeah.
And if the tenant leaves to go find a different place to live, decontrol would say, okay, you can set the rent wherever you like because that tenant is gone.
Yes.
Vacancy control means new tenant, still controlled, same as if the old tenant was there, right?
Yes. Yes.
So why is it important to have vacancy control in that recommendation?
Yeah, I think of it for two primary reasons. One is, I think vacancy decontrol, and I think there is actually proof of this, incentivizes landlords to kick people out because there is reason to want to raise the rent over 3%. And, I'm sure you've heard about this in like even movies and things about rent controlled apartments in New York, right? It's like, oh, they're doing sewer work in my building or like major construction and pounding on my wall at all hours of the day, as a strategy to get me to move out. Usually vacancy decontrol is paired with a policy called just cause protection against eviction, which is supposed to protect people from landlords ending leases in order to move people out and raise rents however much they want. And vacancy decontrol has something like 8 legislated reasons, usually, that they can move somebody out. So I think I have to back up even more. For folks who haven't been renting in a long time or never have, at the end of a tenancy, at the end of 1 year, usually you sign a lease for a year. At the end of the year, the way the law exists right now in Minneapolis, where there is no just cause protection against eviction, a landlord can say, I don't want to renew your lease. They don't have to tell you why. They don't have to anything. They can just send you a notice to say you need to move out in a month. I'm not going to renew your lease. Just cause protection against eviction makes the landlord provide a reason if they're going to end the tenancy at the end of the lease. And, there's only 8 reasons given. However, vacancy decontrol incentivizes the landlord to want to move people out at the end of the lease so they can raise the rent however much they want. And even with just cause, I think there is still additional pressures, and there are ways landlords can find to comply with just cause and move people on. So I think it puts long-term renters at risk. And the second reason is that it makes huge holes in the policy. If we have a 3% cap on rents across the city and there's vacancy decontrol, it's not really a 3% cap on rents across the city. They will continue to go up in large amounts,
What is the status? And you're not a lawyer. I don't think you're a lawyer. Are you not a lawyer?
I'm not a lawyer.
What is the status of just cause law? Because St. Paul had just cause protections thrown out by a judge. Minneapolis was going to enact it. And it was like, well, this judge threw out St. Paul's version and now we're not. So can Minneapolis enact just cause? Or are we still in that pause mode waiting for court to resolve the issue?
I see you very, really tracking housing policy in Minneapolis.
Yes.
So the judge threw out just cause in St. Paul because of the statewide preemption on rent control. So there is a statewide law saying no city can enact rent control except via ballot initiative, except via referendum. And a lot of laws that are protection for renters can run afoul of that. I don't totally understand why. I'm not a lawyer. But that is why Just Cause was suspended in St. Paul. And so you're right, like we are still in a legal limbo of can there be just cause here or not? And that is another reason why vacancy decontrol is a no-go, because there's no way to have just cause, and without just cause, rent control with vacancy decontrol doesn't work.
So if just cause is preempted by the rent control prohibition statewide, could you enact a rent control with a just cause provision because you're doing the whole ballot thing that is the way to get around?
Perhaps that would be the way to do it.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure, and I'm curious about where St. Paul is landing. I guess I'm not tracking if they have a vacancy decontrol in their provision.
So I'm looking at the website, key changes to the ordinance, which the city council and the mayor have approved in St. Paul. Partial vacancy decontrol allows landlords to increase rents by up to 8% plus inflation measured by CPI after a just cause vacancy. So it appears that they have just cause in their key changes to the ordinance.
I remember now. It's a partial just cause, which I don't understand what that means legally. It's a just cause that is only in place for
the vacancy.
Yeah,
stuff.
for vacancy, for partial, they have like a partial vacancy decontrol.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, these policies can get really complicated. I guess, like, I just want to say again, they seem really complicated, but basically you are arguing over two main things. One is, what is your percent cap, and what is included within that?
Did we talk about rent banking yet?
We haven't. Yeah, we haven't talked about rent banking.
Because when I think about rent banking, I've had experiences where my rent has stayed flat because I assume my landlord thinks, well, I'd rather keep you. I don't have any problems with you. Your rent is not going up this year. And then some years it does go up because costs go up and they need to raise it. So not allowing rent banking kind of makes it so you are guaranteed that 3% increase every year in theory, or at least more likely. So why no rent banking where the landlord can simply collect? I'm collecting 3% every year so I can use it 5 years from now. Right. Why not allow that?
To be honest, a lot of the landlords in the space were not interested. They did not talk about it as something that would be helpful. In fact, I heard landlords specifically be like, I don't understand what's the point of that. And I think, in truth, it was, there were more than two. I would say there were at least 3 folks on the group who were there, to get a policy, but openly said that they would not like they would prefer nothing. Yeah. And so trying to negotiate over pieces, I think of rent banking as a partial vacancy decontrol, and it feels like a negotiated position. However, I can't negotiate that position with myself.
Yeah.
I need to be able to do it with someone who in good faith is trying to negotiate with me.
When I think about MHA, and probably the realtors too, I don't know exactly how these two groups are connected, but they feel like they're on the same page. Am I right about that?
They are, yes. That's how they showed up in the space. Yeah.
So they have opposed basically every attempt by the city of Minneapolis to enact rent control. They've had big, splashy campaigns to oppose it, very well-funded campaigns. And so they're a part of this Rent Stabilization Work Group, and I assume they will be the same people running the big, well-funded campaign against enacting it. And yet they have backed a rent control policy, this minority position, 5 to 7% increases with vacancy decontrol, with rent banking.
And CPI.
And the inflation, which is basically like in the most, I don't know if it would apply, it applies to very few cases, the most extreme cases, I would guess this policy would apply to. But I would imagine they would still oppose it in reality. Like they're endorsing it on paper. I imagine they would still, they want nothing, I think.
Yes. Yeah, no, there was a question, we would do these like little polls, these, as part of the process, we did a few polls that were anonymous. And one of them was like, how soon should the policy be implemented? And I'm sure one of those folks wrote never. So like, that was it. That showed up on the meter. Yeah, I mean, the other thing about a policy that is 5 to 7% plus CPI is this year, that's what, like 15%, 14%. And yeah, is that even meaningful? I mean, I don't consider that to be meaningful. That means if your rent is $1,000 and it goes up 15%.
It's $150.
Right.
You stole my math problem. I was going to use the $1,000 example and do that math in my head.
Thanks for doing the math. I got stuck for a minute.
That's why you chose $1,000.
It's true. That is why. Yeah, I mean that it's like maybe you would call it an anti-price gouging measure, but I'm not even sure if I would call it that. It's so high.
I received an email from someone forwarded me an email that the realtors had basically summarized what happened, and that's what they're calling it, anti-rent gouging. Here's another big one. Exemptions for, let's start with affordable housing. It's been a lot in the news. I thought it was kind of interesting that residents of senior housing, affordable senior housing, have been on TV a lot protesting. I think it's like dominium buildings. Yeah. Their rents have gone up an extreme amount. And is that related to the increase in the AMI levels?
Yeah,
recently?
you just gave the example that was going to be my answer, John.
Well, you've done it to me a bunch here today too. We're stealing each other's ideas. We're ahead of each other. Exactly.
Just trying to so of course people discussed, should we exempt affordable housing? And the arguments for that, the people who want that say, this is housing that's already highly regulated. Why would we include it in a policy? And the response is the example you just gave, which is there are lots of different kinds of affordable housing developers, and some of them are not mission driven. So Dominion is not, it's not a nonprofit. It is not mission driven. Its mission is actually to make a lot of money, and they do using that model. And so, and the way that affordable housing rates are calculated is by AMI. And so this year AMI went up a huge amount. I don't know exactly what it was. And I heard that folks in dominium buildings received rent increases around 15% this year. And so that, again, a 15% rent increase is huge, and especially for seniors, folks on fixed income and low income people. Like, it is not, you can't just find $150 a month. A month. I mean, that's a huge amount per year.
You're going without a lot of things if your rent goes up that much, if you plan to stay, if you can afford to stay even.
Right. And half of renters in Minneapolis are cost burdened, meaning they're spending more than 30% of their income on their rent. And so a rent increase like that, takes away from medicine and food and other things you need.
Let's talk about exemptions or no exemptions for just new construction. And the conflict I have in my mind is I don't want this to stifle new housing production, but I think there's like a perverse incentive that if you exempt new construction, like, well, this 30-unit building built in the 1960s, I'm just going to redevelop it and build something that's exempt. But then I don't know how to balance that. I would want to balance that rather than just say a blanket no exemption for new housing. Can you talk about that and why the recommendation said no exemption?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I think the value of not exempting new construction is about saying, look, when someone builds a building, they can set the price. And so they get to start from deciding what it is already. I think if you look at the research it does not, like, empirical research does not show necessarily a connection between rent stabilization policies and stifling new construction. And I think, because, you know, some people will say it does, but usually those folks are not looking at all the factors that can influence new construction. And if you zoom out and talk about the market conditions, it's hard to actually make that connection. I mean, that being said, there are not a lot of examples of rent control or rent stabilization policies that don't exempt new construction. And so it's a little bit untested. But what we do know is that what's hardest for the market or people who develop is a volatile, like, changes, right? And so, and the other thing that felt clear in the work group is that the developers couldn't really tell us why they needed it exempted or how much time, and they especially couldn't tell us in numbers. And so it gets hard to know, like, you know, what is real here. And then I think we go back to the point that you made, John, which is that exempting new construction gives incentives for folks to get rid of buildings and gentrify and put up new buildings. And also that the market is all connected. So, exempting one part, you know, right now, if we exempted new construction for 20 years, that would be almost, I don't remember how much it is, but it's a huge percentage of the rental housing in Minneapolis. It would exempt almost half of the buildings people could live in, the units. And so, when we talk about a policy that we want to protect all renters, I think we need to start in a place where we say we should include as much of it as we can.
How do we handle the cost of repairs and maintenance?
Yeah.
Because there's an argument that you control rents at 3%. What if I have, the unit that I own is just getting more dilapidated year after year. I can't fix it. It's the living conditions for my tenant will just be terrible. How do I do maintenance in that case?
Yeah, we actually put two provisions in our policy that are not exemptions, but exceptions. The difference is an exemption is like a blanket. All this kind of housing is out. An exception is something you can apply for. And so we put an exception for capital improvements. That's like really big investments, like the boiler went out or the roof or whatever. And we also put one in for like habitability and maintenance. And that's really to ensure, you know, that the maintenance is actually done. And if you're gonna use it to increase rents, you actually have to do the maintenance. I can't tell you how many times my members are like, look, okay, rent increase, but like you need to at least make this place livable. Like, how can I do rent increases when I'm still dealing with all this stuff? And so that connection, you know, again, the council is going to debate this, and what we wanted was oversight. If you're going to ask for that exception, you can do that, but we need a city certified process where the city's actually reviewing, what are you spending? Are you going to address the habitability needs before that's like automatically granted?
I can already hear Lisa Goodman saying, we can't afford this. We don't have enough regulatory staff to be deciding who gets an exception, who doesn't. What is the response to the idea? This is just a regulatory headache. It's going to break the city budget. What is the solution?
Yeah. No doubt that people are going to say that.
Sorry to channel Lisa Goodman.
I was hoping you would at least like do an impersonation.
No, I'm not doing impersonation. I don't really have a Lisa Goodman on rent control thing. I'm sorry for being bad at my sound bites here. But back to the question. You're back on the hot seat. How do we handle Lisa Goodman's criticism?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the city spends money on a lot of things, and of course there's stuff. I think, you know, we looked at possibilities for fees on there are a bunch of places where landlords, you know, have to pay as they pay for their licenses. They pay for the administration of the program. I think there's a lot to be determined about how much would it cost to administer, and there's a lot of different ways and setup to figure that out. I agree that, you know, I think we would prefer a program that is more heavily city administered. And actually the policy that we recommended includes a rent board. So that would be, part of city government, but a board that's overseeing that process. And of course it would cost money. And I think, there's two things. One, I think we can raise rents within the system itself from landlords in the process. And the second is, we have to put our money where our values are. We are a 53% renter city. And the renters in our city are, in high percentages, people of color, cost burdened, people most impacted by housing disparities and poverty generally. And, it's important to have a program like this that works for people.
So when we talk about the board, is that kind of like the property tax board that we have where people can appeal where their values are set, that kind of thing?
Something like that. I think, we talked about a city certification process. So if you, that you would do paperwork with the city to prove that you weren't going over the 3%, and that the board would hear appeals or violations of that, or things like that. We also talked about a hybrid board that's partially appointed and partially elected, sort of like Board of Estimate and Taxation, because we saw positives and negatives on both sides of elected and appointed.
I don't want another elected body in Minneapolis. When I hear people talking about electing a police oversight commission, like how many people are we going to elect?
Well, and as you get lower on the ballot, it's like how many people vote for BET and other things like
many.
that.
At that point, I'm just voting for the name I like the most. And that doesn't always work out. What if a good person has a weird name that people don't like?
Yeah.
We may have reached the time on the show where we talk about veto risk, and this will be old news by the time this episode airs, but the mayor, the day following the day when the rent control work group finished their work, Mayor Frey has come out and said,
quote, "It's not happening. I'm not for it. I don't support it. If it moves forward to my desk, I will veto it."
Like the whole thing? I'm sorry for not being aware of this at all, but like the whole thing? Or is he saying I want changes?
I think, he is talking about the recommendation of the 3%, the 3% recommendation. He doesn't say really particularly anything about the other policy. So he doesn't comment about like, I would adjust this or whatever. I don't see his comment on that.
There's an argument this could be a political loser for him, although he may not run for re-election. I don't know. Maybe he's not worried about re-election.
There's really questions
because the ballot question passed pretty overwhelmingly. What was it, like 60 plus?
I don't know if it was quite as high as 60, but it was 53.2%.
It was only 53?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep.
I thought it was more. Well, anyway, Mayor Frey, be more conciliatory. That's my political message to you. You should be willing to work with people on things, not just say no.
Yeah, I mean that's just it. It's like we're doing the process that you put together with the people you put together, right?
Yeah. It's one thing to like slap down the city council. They're elected too. But like these regular people put together their recommendations and you're slapping them down at the very start of the process.
Right. We spent 20 hours of our time for free to get together with people that are hard to work with.
Yeah, you met every week. Were these like 2-hour meetings?
They were 2-hour meetings.
Every week for 3 months you met, spent 2 hours of your time, and I don't know, a lot of these people aren't doing this stuff as their job.
Right. Yes.
Just regular people.
Yes.
The reason I didn't go to any of the meetings, they're at 11 a.m. I can't go to a meeting at 11 a.m.
Yeah, no, people had to make sacrifices to come to it. And, like we engaged in good faith on that stuff. We debated it. We looked at it. We, and did the process that he set up with the people he set us up to be with. And then to say, this is a no-go, feels, I have higher hopes for him than that, right? Like, I know he's not 100% on a policy, but like, work with us, please.
What comes to mind is something I just totally whiffed on and forgot to talk about. Anything?
Well, I mean, we could talk a little bit about who was on the committee if we wanted, who was on the work group.
Yeah, that rings a bell. I have how did the meetings go?
Yeah.
It seemed from reading the meeting minutes that there are people at tables doing small group work. Was everything friendly and nice discussion, or did things get heated?
Yeah, they got heated toward the end, but they set it up so that we had 5 tables of 5 people. And in that space, we started with our values and got to know each other. And honestly, my table was quite cordial and kind. And the landlord at my table, I will probably talk to in the future, right? He'll be someone I call when I have questions about his industry because I found him to be kind and good to work with.
Can you name him?
Yeah, his name is Dan Largan. He works with Mint Properties. He's not the owner, but he is he's in management. And, I found him to be engaging in good faith. So, at our table, he would be like, yeah, I don't really understand why exemptions for new construction, it's not really part of my thing. Or, he explained 4D and how it works, which is Mint Properties participates in that. And, we would ask him, tell us what your costs are. Why do they go up and what are they? So that part felt really good because we could explore the issues, talk about our sides, understand we weren't all in the same place, and be curious with each other. So we did that. We did education in those small groups. We deeply discussed all parts of the policy in small group. And the education was both Cura coming in and talking about their research, and also, the Mapping Prejudice Project talking about how did we get here in housing in Minneapolis. And then we started to put together our policy preferences, and things got a little more tense after that. I will also say that not all tables were as cordial as mine.
Mm-hmm. Did you have the same people at every meeting at your table?
I did. Until the last 2 meetings, we were at that table the whole time.
So it's kind of they're sending a majority report and a minority report, kind of like a Supreme Court thing, it feels like. Was that how it was supposed to go?
Yeah, what a great question. They told us in meeting 2 that that we would make a recommendation to council, and we could make 1 or 2 recommendations. And we asked for specifics, what does it mean to have consensus on a recommendation? And they said 51% is a recommendation. And so, and really in the last meeting, they told us we'll submit both of these to council. And we were like, but only one of them has the consensus amount. And so that felt a little bit like moving the goalposts in the last minute. And I have a lot of curiosity about that. It's one thing to share all the meeting notes from all the meetings, and it's another thing to share 2 policies when you said you would share what was agreed upon, what was consensus.
What is the political landscape on the city council? Are you allowed to say anything? Because I know you're working for an advocacy group.
Right.
How do the numbers look? You will probably face the threat of a mayoral veto. Council members will probably say, well, the mayor's going to veto this anyway. Maybe I throw myself into the majority when I know it won't mean anything. I don't know, lots of things that going on. What is the likelihood you can cobble together a veto-proof majority for something your group thinks is good? Right.
Yeah. I think it's hard to prognosticate. I will say I have heard council members say that they will put something on the ballot. So I think the question is, how strong of a policy can we get? And I think it's our job to go to council and say, and talk about why this matters and why it's urgent, and remind folks that this is real people's lives we're talking about. Homelessness goes up in our city because of a housing affordability crisis. There is a direct connection. And that's the argument we get to make. I think in terms of council, there's work we have to do, and we'll see.
Should I read anything into the fact that the top 2 priorities, like the things that must remain. There are things in bold that must remain in the recommendations. One is the fixed rent increase at 3%. The other is no CPI inflation increase. And then for the minority preference, they said vacancy decontrol was something that they must have. And then the exemption for new construction was also a must have. I mean, there's no overlap there.
Yeah.
In terms of like, you could include all four of those things into a policy.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, in our final our second to last meeting, we actually debated in bigger groups positives and negatives of all the policies. We had 10 policies that were like possible to move forward. And what felt really clear is that like where you landed on the landlord or renter spectrum really determined how you argued what was good or bad for the city. So that's part of what I think about is the perspective. I personally put as my top two, I put 3% and vacancy control. Because for me, I work with lifelong renters who like to stay in the same place for a long time. And that feels like a place that I don't want to negotiate. And there was different opinions about that.
Anything else?
I mean, I think I just keep going back to, we did what the council asked us to do, and we were the people that the council put forward to do it. And so, I think the council's job is to take that seriously, and the mayor's. And so that's what I'm going to be looking for.
So how do you feel? We started this and you seemed very stressed. Do you feel okay? I know after an hour of talking about something, I need to go take a long walk sometimes. And it's probably worse for you because I had control over the agenda here. So how do you feel okay now? Are you going to have to go take a long walk?
Oh, no, I would have to like call some reporters and things.
Okay.
But hopefully I'll do that while walking, which is my preferred.
I don't envy you. Do you have what are you going to do to relax though? Give our viewers or listeners a recommendation. What you would do to relax, what they can do, take up as a hobby that you enjoy.
Oh yeah. Well, I like to play piano, so that would be a relaxing thing that I could do later. My sister's having a sing-along party this weekend, and I have to accompany some of it, so there's some practice I get to do.
Music. Although it's very hard to just decide I'm going to play the piano now. That takes some effort. I was hoping for something with a low barrier to entry.
Okay. Music. Listen to music or enjoy it in any other way that you like to. Dance is also good, y'all.
Jennifer Arnold from Inquilinxs Unidxs has been my guest.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for spending so much time with me. This is the Wedge Life Podcast. I am your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.